One of the things worth noting about Anthony Burgess is the prophetic nature of much of his work. He foresaw, for example, the rise of Mohammedan fundamentalism. Of course, he died well before 9/11, but he fully understood how things would develop. And this came, of course, out of his experience of living in a Muslim-majority country. But another very interesting thing about Burgess was that he understood, and this, I suppose, is part of his contribution as a post-colonial writer. He understood the shame that white people were to feel about being white. Now, of course, it's commonplace for white people to express shame for being white, and in fact, many of them wish to appropriate other racial identifications. But Burgess saw this as early as the mid-50s. For example, in the first volume of his autobiography, which is called Little Wilson and Big God, being the first part of the Confessions of Anthony Burgess, he talks about the affair he was conducting with a beautiful Malay dance hostess called Rima. He states,
"Lying with Rima, I regretted my whiteness. A white skin was an eccentricity and looked like a disease."
Then there's the Malayan trilogy, which is very rewarding on this subject. Right off the bat, we get the character Flaherty. Incidentally, that's a rather well-named character. The name Flaherty it's rather close to the word flatulence. And indeed, Flaherty is extremely flatulent in his denunciations of Nabby Adams for drinking too much, and so on and so forth. At one point, in exasperation at Nabby Adams, Flaherty says,
"Christ, man, I was ashamed of my white skin."
There is, you see, the shame of being white. At some point in the Malayan trilogy, Victor Crabbe, who's one of the two Burgess-type characters, the other is Rupert Hardman. Burgess puts his personality into two characters in this trilogy. One is Victor Crabbe, the other is Rupert Hardman. Crabbe blurts out at one point,
"Sometimes I wish to God I weren't white, so I get people to stop looking at my face as if it were that of a leper or a jackbooted tyrant. I wish people would just start thinking of what I am, what I'm trying to do, not at this accident of pigmentation."
The frustration that Crabbe feels about being white in, what are we talking, 54, 55. And the narrator later on states the following.
The fact was that Victor Crabbe, after a mere 6 months in the Federation, had reached that position common among veteran expatriates. He saw that a white skin was an abnormality, and that the white man's ways were fundamentally eccentric.
In the Malayan trilogy, the whites are variously described as the white sods, the white oppressors, the white parasites, the white leeches. we are introduced to the character Talbot, the poet with the gargantuan appetite, who is to be cuckolded by Crabbe. He puts it in this way. He's referring to all the other races in Malayan.
They all think our skin is our only piece of parchment. We carry our whiteness like a diploma.
Finally, in the trilogy, we have the character Rupert Hardman, who is a version of Burgess himself. Hardman is described as follows.
Rupert Hardman was very much a white man, and all too aware of it. His skin was deficient in pigment, but only in moments of extreme depression, when pale eyes stared back bitterly from the mirror, did he call himself an albino. He wasn't quite that. It was just a rather unusual deficiency in pigmentation. A day on the beach, and his thin body grew angry and peeled in its rage. His face grew tatters of curling, white-tipped scarf skin. His body, in spite of himself, sheared away from the sun as a cat, stiff with distended claws, shears away from bathwater.
And it's Hardman that makes the most important prophetic remark on the subject of the whites, on the subject of whiteness, towards the end of the novel, when he says, having at this point converted to Islam, addressing himself to the whites that remain.
All your enemies are real enough. They're out to get you, every one of you. The white man's day is coming to an end. Götterdämmerung, you've had it.